Good afternoon and welcome to Thought Rock Live. My name is John Towsley and I'm your presenter for today. And we will be talking about what to do in Microsoft and support for Office as advertised. So just a couple of housekeeping things. In the control panel on your right-hand side, you will see a question and answer panel. So if you have any questions or want to interact, please feel free to post them there, and we'll watch for those and answer questions as we go through the presentation. And we'll also have some question and answer at the end of the presentation. This broadcast is being recorded, so if in the event you decide you'd like to share it with colleagues or friends, please feel free to do that. We'll send a link out to you at the conclusion of the broadcast. So with that, why don't we get started? So as we advertised, the Thought Rock topic for today is Microsoft is ending support for versions of Office, and as we go forward, that presents a challenge to IT managers in terms of how they support that migration and move their users to newer versions of Microsoft Office. How do you do that without disturbing the workflow and impacting productivity? So what we're going to talk about is some techniques that we've seen that are successful for doing that, and show you examples as well. Started. So quick, 8% of CIO Magazine survey respondents said they're afraid of their upcoming Office migration. So what exactly does that mean in terms of afraid? Really what they're talking about here is that these days there are 750 million Office users worldwide, and Microsoft Office in most organizations really is a mission-critical application. So it's used for communication, collaboration on projects, scheduling time, scheduling meetings, sharing documents, especially if you're a SharePoint customer, and it's using deliverables to organizations' customers. So if people are not productive in Office or don't know how to use it, then there's clearly a problem. And why are these people, 72% of IT decision makers, still running Office 2003 or 2007, according to a Forrester research survey done back in March 2010? Well, the answer is, if you tie back to this fact, they're concerned about the migration. And lots of migrations that have gone on in the past have created problems for IT people and productivity issues for their users. So we came up with a list of, based on some of our research, so the top 5 migration hazards that you might encounter. So number 1, from an IT perspective, is clearly increased help desk volumes. So we moved to a new version, and people can't find the things they used to do. Buttons or menu items have changed or moved, or it just looks different, and they're not comfortable in it. And that causes a loss of productivity, both on the user as well as on the help desk. So remember, help desk calls aren't cheap. So the average help desk call is about $24 at this point in time. So, and that, that's a fully loaded cost, obviously, but it's a real cost. The second thing, as we already alluded to, is lost employee productivity. So there's a good reason to be worried. Our experience shows that people do lose productivity either because they can't find something and they're calling the help desk. Their increased volume on the help desk means there are wait times. An IDC survey found that the average worker spends about 8.8 hours a week, so it's like 20% of their time, searching for information. And most of that it is around trying to accomplish the things they need to accomplish in applications. And that may not be limited, obviously, to Microsoft Office, but it's a big factor in that. So employee productivity is a big reason to be concerned about moving from one version to another, and it's why, as we said, a lot of people delay. The next top hazard is frustrated employees, and obviously these things are related, but it's no secret as people become frustrated, they get dissatisfied, and things that they used to do or think that should be simple are no longer simple, and that drives that frustration. It drives employee dissatisfaction, and nobody likes that situation. So the costs go up to the user or to the organization, and the productivity goes down. In extreme cases, this may not happen for Microsoft Office, but in extreme cases, you're looking at sick days, turnover, all of those things that nobody wants to talk about. So pretty clearly it is well documented that happy employees and not frustrated employees are more productive, and there's obviously clearly benefits to trying to keep people in that mind frame, if you will. The fourth migration hazard is doing nothing to support employees, and certainly we see this fairly often. Because the applications are enhancing but not fundamentally changing. Back in the old days, the way you did basic tasks sometimes changed from version to version. That's not true anymore with GUI interfaces and such. And so there's a misconception often in IT departments and training and development departments that we can roll out a new version of Office and people will figure it out because this stuff's easy and it's not that different. There is not any longer a large support from most organizations' top executives for any kind of migration training strategy, and with good reason, and we'll come to that in a minute. So it's not that they're wrong, but doing nothing to support employees is a hazard. So we'll talk a little bit about how you bridge that gap. And certainly doing nothing is going to be a problem, while at the same time providing training the way that it's historically been done is not supported by executives, and with good reason. So we'll come to some potential solutions to that challenge in a minute. The fifth one is doing the wrong thing, and that's related to the previous topic. So it is often the wrong thing is doing migrations and rollouts of new versions of Office the way we did them before. So historically, if you look back, you'll probably find in your organizations that moving from one version to another was supported by a day or a half a day of training on each of the major applications: Word, Excel, PowerPoint, probably. And then as new applications got added, SharePoint, now Link, then people started to say, hey, we need to shrink this down a little bit. So we got down to, let's do lunch and learns, and let's build some e-learning and roll all of that out. And the challenge is that it's reasonably well documented. The training is not particularly effective. So it's not a whole lot better than doing nothing in many instances, because A, we spent money, B, we have, at least for a while, the false impression that we train people so they should know how to do this stuff. But if the training's not effective, the money was wasted and the frustration levels didn't change. So going back to number 3, we just didn't get anywhere, essentially. So the question then becomes, what do we do about all of this? And there are some possibilities here. So if we can get it right, then there are tremendous call savings that we could potentially generate based on these factors. So help desk call volumes and durations, we can drive those down. So you see a number here of $80,000 to $100,000 per 1,000 employees per year. Employee productivity, based on some standard costing models here, we can drive up employee productivity and potentially gain 20,000 to 30,000 hours of productivity per 1,000 employees per year. And employee satisfaction, which is a fairly key measure for most large organizations now globally. And if you think about why that is, in some ways when I first saw these measurements and statistics, I thought, gee, that's as my old strategy prof used to say, kind of touchy-feely. But the reality is that employee satisfaction is a key indicator of some of the other major costs to organization. So the cost of turnover is very high in terms of recruiting, training, getting people up to speed and productive. And as we move forward, especially in North America, to trying to manage the baby boomers and that bubble of boomers retiring, retention of employees becomes key, because more and more we're going to be competing for scarce resources. So based on the experience we've seen, it is possible to generate these kind of savings. So let's talk a little bit about the training component and why it doesn't work, or potentially doesn't work. The truth about knowledge retention is that after time, in terms of training as an event or learning as an event, you lose or do not retain most of the knowledge that you gained in that event. So we've probably all experienced that. You come out of the course, you maybe do what we call a level 1 evaluations, the happy sheets. Yes, I like the course. And maybe you do a level 2 evaluation where you do some form of assessment at the end of the course or throughout the day, or if it's e-learning, assessments through the course, and maybe a test at the end. And you say, yeah, you know what? Hey, people liked the training and they learned something because we tested them and they learned it. The reality is that after 48 hours, they probably dropped their retention rate of those things they learned to 33%, and that'll drop over the next few weeks down to like 12%. We've known this for a long time in the learning and development business. It's not a secret. We just didn't have a reasonably good way or a cost-efficient way to address this issue. The key to addressing this issue is actually the concept of performance support. This concept is not a new concept. What's happened, though, is in the last few years, the technologies and connectivity available to enable performance support have changed dramatically. So it gives us some tools that we didn't have previously. So do a couple more slides on performance support, and then we'll tie that into the office migration. You can see how that's going to work. So we've historically been very good at training, as we said, on the event and training to concept and task mastery. But we've left it to chance when people go back to the office or back into their environment in terms of their ability to retain the pieces they need to perform on the job. And we clearly need them to have competency on the job. It not only delivers productivity for us and results, but it does reduce their frustration. So leaving that to chance is generally a bad idea. Once they are competent on the job, then you get the true value of training. So I'm not arguing here that we shouldn't train, quite the opposite. But the key to that sustainment is this concept of performance support. So in a dynamic work environment, what you're able to do through performance support is drive that competency up and then sustain that competency over the length of the employee's engagement with the organization. So just as a quick example, so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about, Disney Parks and Resorts rolled out an application in all their parks for the housekeeping staff, so 20,000 people doing housekeeping and maintenance on their properties. And this had a modern application and interface, and it's for doing things like, ordering soap or toilet paper or logging a ticket because the toilet's broken, whatever. When they initially rolled this out, they were doing 20 hours of training, 15 in the classroom and 5 in e-learning per employee. And when they did the analysis, the business came back and said, hey, you know what, we're actually getting pretty poor adoption of the application, and we're having operational problems because people don't know how to do this, so we need more training. The learning executive there said, well, we can't really do more training because we've covered all the topics. So we can run them through the same training, and that's years ago was kind of our old adage in the training world, right? If they didn't get it the first time, then the next time we'll talk slower and louder, and that's kind of the only option. And so what happened is Disney adopted a performance support model from a company called Intuitive, And what they were able to do is drive down that 20 hours of training to 5 hours and drove tremendous amounts of savings, as you can imagine, because you're talking about a large employee population, so about 20,000 employees earning hourly wages that cycle through the parks because they have seasonality and so on. So huge cost saving from the delivery of the training, from the employee time in the training, and then a dramatic increase in the adoption of the application, the productivity, and the reduction in operational problems. So, it's a good example, or a parallel example, to the Microsoft Office I'm talking about today. So you can drive continuous improvement by enabling a performance support strategy. So let's just talk really quickly about why that training doesn't work. A couple of guys have done some research on this. A gentleman by the name of Bob Mosher and Conrad Gottfredson published a book. And what they came out with is really there are 5 moments of need. The first 2 moments of need we've approached traditionally with classic training, e-learning, webinars, or classroom training. And we really look at it this way, right? Training objectives, hey, what are you going to learn in the course? And we'll let you practice, and then we'll go into details about why you're doing this, and then we'll give you a book or a job aid that tells you here are the steps. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly valid, as we saw in the previous slides. You do need some form of event-based training. And it is typically effective in driving that sort of 33% retention up front and making people aware of things. The second 3 moments that they identified are when I actually need to do something. So in moments 1 and 2, we're really talking about when I want to learn something for the first time or when I need to learn more about something. So if I've just got hired and I'm not aware of how something works, or in the case of today's topic, we're going to move to a new version of Microsoft Office and we're going to implement a link and a SharePoint server, which we hadn't done before. And that's going to impact our workflows and the way we want to work together. Well, I need some formal training. I don't even know they exist. So you got to tell me what they are and why we're doing this and how it's going to impact me and all of those things. And that's good. At some point, I may need to learn more about it as I get more advanced in terms of how I'm going to use a SharePoint server, store files, and so on. Formal training is great for that. The challenge is when I go to apply that at the office. So moments 3 through 5 are when I'm trying to do something, when something changes, so maybe the process we have for executing on storing files in SharePoint has changed, or for booking meetings has changed, or when something goes wrong, right? Then the challenge with the model that we have, if you look at that triangle of training objectives, conceptual practice, and deeper detail, then down to steps, is at the moment that I need to do something, I don't want to open up a manual or log on to an LMS and get into the e-learning program and read, in this course you will learn, and then have to linearly go through that material or search randomly through the material if I can to find the answer to what I'm trying to do right now. That's the reason that you see the spike in help desk calls, because I'm going to take the path of least resistance. People are like water. They do that. So I'm going to pick up the phone and call the help desk. That's the way that I'm kind of programmed by nature to deal with this challenge. So from a performance support perspective, what we do is we flip that triangle upside down. And we say, okay, what if when someone really needs to do it, they can get access to this 1, 2, 3 steps right now? So if I want to book a meeting in Link, and I've never done that before, how about you just give me the steps to do that? And if I can't remember the steps, give me a little more detail. And then if I realize, hey, you know what, I missed the training because I never did that when it was rolled out through e-learning, or I missed the webinar and the lunch and learn when the products first got rolled out, maybe tell me where to go find that formal training, a recording of the webinar or the e-learning program that shows me how to do it. And when I have time, I'll go back and do that. So now I know that those other resources exist. So we call that concept actually is performance support brokering. So there's all kinds of learning assets that your organization has built up over time, if you think about that. How do you fill in your expense report? You know, how do you book meetings or meeting rooms within my organization? Don't know about you, but every time I go to not every time, lots of times I go to a customer, we go to the meeting room, and you know, two different parties show up, and hey, I booked this room. No, I booked this room, right? So how do we avoid that kind of stuff? You've got learning assets already in your organization, and you can leverage those in this model by pointing people to them when they need them and at the moment of need. So what does this look like if you execute on it? Well, if you think about performance support as being essentially a knowledge base or information in the center of this process, then you're going to have some prerequisite training. That's that moment 1 and 2. And that might be e-learning, as I said. It might be webinar, could be classroom training, or a combination of the 3. But that content is going to come from this central performance support repository. So we're going to collect all of that knowledge and the assets that we've had built up over time about how we do things. And we're going to use that as the basis for creating that prerequisite training. We may do some classroom webinar, as I said, and the feedback we get in the classroom and webinars is generally going to update the performance support. So, for example, in the Disney case, what they did in the half day they ended up spending in the classroom is they basically came in and said, hey, you've already taken the prerequisite training, so you know what the application's about and why we do it and how the process flow looks. So today we're going to step you through some examples, and we're going to step you through all the examples leveraging our performance support tool, and we're going to show you where to find the answers when you need to find them. So it's already tightly integrated, and you're changing the behavior of people to say the best place to get the answer is from this process and architecture that we've designed around performance support. And then we link that right into the application. So very important. When I'm in the application, for performance support to be successful, it needs to be 3 things. It needs to be embedded. So by that I mean if I am in Outlook trying to schedule a link meeting and I need to learn how to do that because I've never done it before, don't make me exit from Outlook, open a new window, go to a SharePoint server or an LMS and search for the how do I do this, or as we said in the pitfalls, in hazards, you know, expect that I'll just go Google it and find a generic answer from somewhere. Give me the assistance I need right in that application embedded. It needs to be contextual. So by that I mean, think about my meeting room example. It needs to tell me about the meeting rooms that we have in my building or that are available to me, not just the generic support that may come from Microsoft or from wherever I find it if I Google it, right? So make it specific to me, and then it needs to be just enough. So don't bore me with all the details and the theory about booking meetings in Microsoft Link or from Outlook for Microsoft Link, right? What I want you to do is tell me exactly what I need to do in this particular instance within my organization. And then there's a link back here to the service desk. So if, in fact, I do need to call for support because I can't figure it out or I haven't changed my behaviors yet, then the service desk has access to that same performance support in an ideal world. And they can actually send me the link and reinforce the behavior. Hey, next time you need to know this, go check it out in the performance support application or database. Coming back to Microsoft Office. So Microsoft's kind of looked at what's going on, obviously, in the industry, and they take a leading position clearly, and has said, you know, we need to move to a new way of working and understand that the link between Office applications, in their case Microsoft Office, and the storage of knowledge and files, in their course SharePoint is a solution, and the telecommunications connectivity, in their case Link, is key to the way that teams moving forward will be able to leverage technology to become more productive. So clearly the competition in that space is coming from people like Google with Google Apps, right? As the generations change and you see people becoming more used to being plugged in and online, then people are beginning to expect that I can collaborate, I can work online, I don't necessarily have to travel and send files around, that those files should be shared. We should be able to collaborate on documents on our server, however we do that, because we're working in virtual teams and we're working in flex time, and we see this in tons of organizations. So it's kind of exciting in a lot of ways that we're getting to the point where we can really leverage the technologies and start to capitalize and use some of the office automation products in a connected, flexible way. But there are obviously challenges around that, right? Because we're asking employees now to do things in a new way. We need to support them in how they're going to achieve that. So if you look at that, in the ideal world, what really you have are essentially scenarios where employees are trying to accomplish things or do things in their everyday activity. So you have, people who need to do things in real life. And what we do from a performance support perspective, or can do, is support those scenarios so that people can understand, hey, with this new technology and with the connectivity between the various components of that new technology, I can actually be more productive and I can do things in a different and better way than I used to. Coming back to those first hazards, right? Nobody likes change. So you've got to make this easy for me. If left to my own devices, you roll out a new version of Microsoft Office and give me access to Link and SharePoint, I will probably default to doing things the way I used to do them, because that's the way I approach this, right? So I used to do it like this, so how do I do it now in the new application the way I used to do it? To truly embrace and leverage the technology, we are actually asking people to do things in a different way, and we need to support them in doing that. So it's probably best if I show you a quick example of how this might work. In this case, actually, I will use the intuitive example because it's one that we know, or I know. There are, clearly other vendors and applications out there potentially. A lot of times people say, well, why wouldn't I just use Microsoft Help? And in fact, in this case, Microsoft, certainly in the Netherlands, Intuit is a gold partner, actually has embraced this solution as an enabler to rolling out their new products and solutions to their customers, and said, you should look at this. So if you think about simple examples, if we're going to leverage the connectivity of Microsoft Office and Link and SharePoint, then something as simple as booking meeting rooms or completing expense reports and sharing them for approval, making sure everyone has access to the latest expense report template, are the kinds of things that are sort of low-hanging fruit that we can do, and we can encourage people now to start to leverage the tools for collaboration by providing them with that level of support. So what I'm going to do, let's see, give me 1 second. Oops, sorry. Just going to bring here, and there we go. Pop that up on your screen. So in the case where we wanted to take somebody and have them collaborate through using these applications, in this case, the demo will step us through going into Outlook to book a meeting, creating that meeting in Link, and recording the notes in OnePoint, and sharing them on a SharePoint server. So very clearly, this may not be something that people have done before. So in Intuitive's case, what happens is the performance support pops up in a window, sits on top, and stays on top. And you'll notice that it follows and the content changes contextually as somebody's going here, booking that meeting, a new Link meeting in Outlook. And on the right-hand side, you see that it's providing the steps because they've never done that before. So as I said, very simple 1, 2, 3 steps that know what I'm trying to do, what application I'm in, and allow me to complete the tasks and give me a reference for that. So once again, in this case, this will notes essentially giving me all the information. I've never done this before, so I want some graphic annotation of what I'm doing. And it's showing me exactly in what buttons I need to push and how I need to make the recording of those notes in the OneNote application. I'm still seeing contextual help for the tasks that I'm trying to perform. And that window can be sized and moved around and so on. So it's a good example of how performance support can be leveraged to encourage people to change their behavior and support them in working in a new way. So in this case now, the individual's moving over to SharePoint to store the file. Hasn't done that before, but gets the step-by-step instructions. So you'll notice that that's quite different than what you would see in a classic kind of help application, because it can be tailored and customized to the workflow, as I said, embedded, contextual, and just enough. So that's an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. So that kind of brings us really to the end of the presentation today. If there are any questions or comments, then I'd be happy to take those. And as I said, we will record this session and post it for future reference. If anybody would like to see that or share it with colleagues, that will be available. So thank you very much for joining us on Thought Rock Live, and we look forward to having you join us again.